Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later from 2002. And yes, here we are back again. Danny Boyle once again here. And this guy, I just thought I was in the mood, to watch another film from him tonight, since I, of course, recently rewatched for the fifth time, seeing Trainspotting, and of course, shortly after that, T2 Trainspotting, aka Trainspotting 2. Yes. I just kind of was in the mood once again tonight. It's been Friday night actually. When filming this review now, yes, just in the mood once again for another Danny Boyle, and this time 28 days later. Here is the Blu-ray steelbook. Oh, actually, yeah, those don't look as good there. Got little steelbook protectors here. I used to get these only really with my first steelbooks. I don't really use them now. I find it a bit pointless actually. It's just too much, and it doesn't actually look as good on display, but yeah, they do, if you're interested, they do kind of protect it from scratches, although I don't really care about that too much now, and I think actually, if there's some scratches on it, it kind of just adds to the, the fact that this is my, kind of Blu-ray and stuff. And yes, here it is though, an amazing steelbook, just want to show that there, the red on that, and yes, the back, and yes, here it is. I was very excited to rewatch this film. It's been a couple of years since my last watch, I believe, and yes, stunning film. Once again, just blown away. And spoilers alert here. If you haven't seen the film, certainly this will have quite it'll be quite a heavy spoiler, filled review. And of course, if you haven't seen the film, certainly go and watch it, and then come back to this review. Just be warned there. Absolutely, I'll be getting into some spoilers here and stuff. A bit of shame if it was ruined and stuff, but yes, here we are. This film, I've seen this quite a few times over the years. And I saw this when I was around 9 or 10 years old. Yeah, quite young once again. And yes, I watched it on TV, and I'd heard some things about it. I was really just, kind of trying to watch as much horror films at that point as I could. Just great horror films, and ones that, of course, zombies. Although this is not technically zombies in that sense, but zombie films, I always had a good time with if they were, good films. And this kind of, I watched Dawn of the Dead, the '70s one, and the 2000s one as well. I watched all these sort of films, quite a lot of the Dead films, and I've never seen Night of the Living Dead actually all the way through, but basically all the other ones, and I'd watched quite a few films in this vein, and this one, of course, was really praised, and people have been talking about this, and I just wanted to see it. And yes, this is a very, very interesting film from Danny Boyle, and you could say it's had quite a varied career, in terms of just the genres, he's dabbling into, and just the style. You could say this is one of his early ones, much more gritty, maybe you could say more personal, and less Hollywood in that sense. They're very, very low budget at times, or they feel like that, or they don't, kind of thing, in the case of Trainspotting, the first one. But yeah, very, very interesting how, he would make, of course, The Beach just before this, which is a bit of a kind of, that kind of goes off into his later stage career, in the style and stuff. But, that's kind of the odd one now. The rest of them really are low-key, kind of, really, really British feeling, gritty films. Of course, Slumdog Millionaire, is a very, very different film, obviously, as we know. It's much more kind of mainstream, if you will, and, kind of, yes, a very, very different style, a different tone, although at times it's very, very dark and graphic, that film, and we'll get to that. But this film, yeah, it's kind of in the vein more of Trainspotting, kind of the style and stuff, and very, very gritty, this film. Famously, if you didn't know, this is of course, very well known for it being one of the first, purely digital films. Very, very cheap, very cheap indeed. Cameras and just equipment, of course, for a number of reasons. But famously, it's known for its very, very low quality. Now we'll get to this a bit more later on in the film, but it's, of course, for a number of reasons, to create more of a kind of post-apocalyptic feel. For the kind of the atmosphere, the gritty nature, very, very harsh, tone. The script, of course, just being so dark, and just I think as well, obviously practical reasons. One being setting up the equipment, all the shots, just for it being very very quick to kind of handle in comparison to film and stuff. They just kind of, because of course London had to kind of be although most of it kind of shot early on in the day, perhaps before rush hour and stuff. They had to be closed off different sections. For short periods of time, short bursts in the different locations, but it had to happen, of course, and that's something that's very very hard to do, of course. It's quite unbelievable how they actually done this. And you kind of think, wow, they actually, London is empty, as we see it in different shots in the film, because they've actually closed off the streets and have created all this stuff going on in different sets, and that in itself is just really amazing. Of course, growing up near London, as I've maybe said before, just really weird actually, just to kind of see London, in different shots in the film, just empty, and it's something else really. And yes, just this, of course, but the practical reasons for this, but also for artistic choices to kind of create a more maybe distorted, it's kind of dreamlike at times, but more kind of nightmarish, kind of distorted view of the world, since it's of course post-apocalyptic. That kind of ties in there, and also it kind of just. I think Danny Boyle is just really. There's something about Danny Boyle. He's just in his element. When it comes to gritty films in this vein, I think he just knows how to create, stunning films when kind of given. Maybe went back to basics in that sense. All about the storytelling, all about just using what you can. It's all about how you explore this and just use it. And execute it no matter what the kind of budget. I think he's just one of them genius guys who knows how to bring this together, and it's something that just seeing this in this way also just stands out. I think from different films. It's some people of course do not like this, and the look of the film at all. I've heard a lot of people say it looks really bad. I disagree with that. I can understand, and actually, as you know, probably I do much prefer film to digital, and more beautiful films, if you will, more kind of visually, wonderful films. But actually, on this occasion, there's something that I really, really love in every area about the way this film looks visually, and the editing as well, and just the feel to this film. It really benefits massively. It wouldn't be the same film if it had been more kind of sophisticated cameras. I think there's something about this and the way that Danny Boyle and everyone involved use this kind of style to create, in the elements, in every sense, really, for me, an absolute masterpiece. Yes, indeed, I think, and once again, blown away, absolutely shaken to the core, and certainly, we'll just quickly talk about that opening scene. Just once again, and when I watched this, we'll go back to when I watched it for the first time, 9, 10, something like this. I actually had to turn it off, and this rarely really happens, with films and stuff, but I had to actually turn this off. I remember, and I just went, no, I can't watch it. Just even that opening scene, and actually, for me, that's the most disturbing moment in the film. There's something about that. It may be one of the top 10 most disturbing scenes I've ever witnessed. Maybe kind of talk about that in the comments alone. But there's something about that scene. I even now that I'm a bit more grown up, I still can't really handle it. And I watched some of this scene, and then I put it off, and then I went back to it about 10 minutes after. I thought, let's just restart it and just do it. Just get through it and just see where the film goes. As I say, luckily that is the most kind of disturbing scene, and from then on, kind of gets more easygoing. I must say now, if you're not a fan of horrors, if you're not someone who can, watch, dark films, graphic films, then maybe, I can't really say that I'd recommend this film in that sense. And that's okay if you can't watch these sort of films, and that is absolutely understandable. Not everyone can, of course, but if you can, certainly recommendable. I think this is probably the best pure horror of the entire decade, the 2000s, that is. And I think just yes, because Shaun of the Dead, I do prefer to this. That's a horror comedy, of course, and it's not the same. But yeah, 28 Days Later, I think in pure horror terms, I think this is probably quite possibly the best, my favourite. I just think it's an absolute masterpiece, and the opening scene, of course, this is something else. This is showing, of course, these activists breaking into this lab. I believe it's in Cambridge. It's meant to be there, and of course, you've got these chimps, these apes, in these cages, and stuff, and hooked up to machines, perhaps, and forced, of course, to watch, violent, images on the media. Of course, you've got the TV screens there, and all around this, for example, this individual, this individual ape, who basically it's forced to watch, rage, of course, and acts of rage, and of course it's showing riots and everything, etc. We know this stuff here, and of course we learn that they are infected, and basically these activists are not listening to this scientist, and they do release, of course, these apes, and then that's when, of course, the virus does spread, and we learn, of course, that it goes across the entire UK, and we do hear that it's across the entire world, Paris and stuff. But later on in the film, that's kind of addressed a bit more, because you couldn't really think, how would this happen? That isn't really possible in the way that this virus spreads, because for obvious reasons, because it's so quickly that it happens, and someone is consumed by the rage, of course, and it just wouldn't happen with planes and stuff. It just wouldn't occur. So we do, of course, learn later on, different things there, and it kind of addresses things more. But basically, yes, you have this opening scene, which, while I do still find it very, very hard of an experience, it is a stunning opening scene. That is how you set up a horror film. It's certainly disturbing, that's for sure, and does, of course, set up these themes, and just this idea, this fear of, spreading of infection, of a virus. In this film, of course, it is rage that is spreading, consuming individuals, and of course spreading through contact with blood, for example, and of course those that are infected basically vomit blood. It's really, really disturbing and quite gross. Of course, as we know if you've seen the film. But yes, this is how it happens, and in this film, of course, famously, kind of started off this thing of running zombies, fast-moving zombies, even though they're not really technically zombies. But yes, basically, this is the kind of thing that started this, and what a unique kind of spin on this genre, perhaps. Even though it's not technically part of this genre, it kind of is as well. I do consider it for the purpose of lists a zombie film. If I was asked what my favourite zombie films, perhaps I'd say Shaun of the Dead. And then I'd say this. To be quite honest, I think as much as I do love other ones like the original Dawn of the Dead, I think this is an absolute masterpiece, no doubt, and just one of my favourite Boyle films. I think it's just so thrilling constantly, every single moment, and it also has great characters. This is such a kind of character-driven film, and of course it's got many themes explored in this, and I think there's so much to talk about here. But maybe I won't talk about this for massive amounts of time, because more of an analysis video that would be, and I think maybe in the future I'll do that. Certainly so. But yes, this film, it has themes once again of consumerism, but this time around there's something that's really going on here that's kind of, of course there's many links between this rage virus and what is just happening anyway in the world, which is wonderfully kind of brought up later in the film, especially. But yes, this whole kind of thing of religion and science is what's really interesting to me, and this whole kind of the way this is explored through this epidemic, this outbreak, and you may think, when first seeing it or first watching the first act, that it's another kind of, just a horror, a thrilling horror film. But this has got so much on its mind, and I think just once again, Danny Boyle creating an absolute masterpiece of storytelling, and relating different themes, to actual life, and all through this, of course, this horror film. But it's more than that, and I think it's just the way that it kind of explores, these different takes, religion and science, maybe the way that people, the differences here, the conflict within this, and the mistrusting of this, and the doubting this perhaps. And I think just in general, this kind of spiritual feeling this film has, the way the characters throughout, the sense of hope, and this kind of this feeling and the journey they go on, and in the end, of course, as we know, they do come out on the other side, apart from, of course, very unfortunately, of the main characters anyway, Frank, and we'll get to that in a moment. But yes, after this opening scene involving this lab, which is just so disturbing, and there's something so just raw about that scene, and just even the clips, of course. That whole scene is a masterclass in setting up a film that is meant to be disturbing and meant to kind of shock and really say something very, very strong, and very, very true in many regards. And I think after that, of course, we have Cillian Murphy, who plays our main protagonist of Jim. Jim is here. He wakes up in the hospital, of course, very similar to, for example, The Walking Dead. Yes, he basically wakes up 28 days later after this initial outbreak. These apes breaking out, and of course, affecting those in that lab. To begin with, of course, it spreads from there. Of course, all of London here has been evacuated. We learn, and of course, Cillian Murphy's character is stumbling around. He's just woken up, and he's been in this hospital, woken up from a coma, and of course he wakens up to this, and he thinks it'd be a nightmare, of course, but of course this has happened. This outbreak has occurred, and not for a single moment do I doubt this. There's something so believable about this film. The first act, I think actually I kind of it's something I kind of view this as, much as I love the opening act. I think at the same time it's one of them things that I'm kind of just, well, we have to kind of get through this, because it's so on edge. I think I'm so distraught with this first act. I can't quite handle it fully, but then I can, and once that happens, the film once again, as always, just reveals itself as a truly warm film actually. And I think I'm glad that the first time I watched it, I gave it a go after that initial, I couldn't watch this kind of thing. Of course I was very young then, but yes, this film, I don't think you should, maybe if you can't handle it at first, I think maybe give it a go and see where it takes you, because this does open up, and actually, it of course wonderfully breaks out into the countryside, and these wonderful, this wonderful symbolism, and these messages of nature as well, and the contrast between the city and nature, and these idyllic settings. I think actually it's a wonderful journey, spiritual journey. It's kind of actually as well these individuals placed in this survival situation, and eventually, specifically these four main characters, Frank, of Hannah, of Selena, and Jim. They basically become this family, and that's something really wonderful, I feel. And just the way that Danny Boyle directs this film, it's just full of heart. It's full of just humanity. It's just what this is. It's not a disaster film, which kind of shows just shows the government, perhaps the army in specific ways. We do see, of course, members of the army later on in the film, but not in the conventional way. But yes, as I'm saying, just it isn't this typical mainstream in that sense, kind of zombie film, disaster film, post-apocalyptic film. This is something that is just dealing with a very, very small group here. These humans put in this situation, and then of course just following them, relating to them as just complex, compelling, very, very likable, charming characters, and then their journey. Instead of kind of bigger scale, at the start of it, it is, of course, it's got a scope to it, and you believe this has happened, I guess, to the UK at least, and despite that, it's through this personal, stance in it, and the way that it is these individual characters, very, very small group, that we kind of feel this through. It is, an epic film in that regard, in the sense of, it's very, of course, it's a kind of a film that deals with, this massive outbreak. And it's just so personal. This is the difference. This is a fully personal film that doesn't become generic. It doesn't, kind of as we know, it doesn't take the stance that a lot of films do, and I think it's so much more effective in that sense, and so much more unique and human, character driven. Such a personal film, despite being a big disaster film, of course, and these themes that you'd see in a lot of films that are more mainstream and stuff. This is the one that really stays true to the characters, to this journey personally, and while at the same time, of course, balancing out this kind of these macro, for example, themes, but it's through genius exposition. It's through that opening scene, setting up this tone, and leaving out actually the for example, you don't see the actual spreading of the virus. You don't see this at all. You just see this opening bit, how it initially begins, the very beginnings of this, and then you kind of left to wonder. You see leaflets and stuff. You see all this about the outbreak, the newspapers, for example. You of course, well, it's just implied. You see London, you see buses overturned, you see no one there apart from Jim at first, and this kind of, it doesn't need to kind of show what happened in between. It's just, this is how you tell this story. It really is quite a remarkable film, just in the way that it's so subtle, and it's so kind of wonderfully. The exposition is so good. It's just a sense of wonder, a sense of the filmmaker and everyone involved leaving out this kind of certain things to show, and then of course keeping it just so tight, and this kind of the way that the film was shot, and the handheld cameras, for example, the digital in this way, just enhances this kind of right in there, and there's certain shots in this film actually they're very similar to Trainspotting, and the way they get Danny Boyle and everyone getting up close and personal in that sense, that kind of phrase, it just works wonderfully. And you do have these at the same time, these wides, these kind of big shots, landscape shots, by for example, just seeing another trademark, of course, Jim walking across the bridge there, and basically just this combination is really wonderful. It's a gritty film. It's very extremely raw, this film, extremely disturbing, dark, atmospheric, and kind of just, you could say, maybe some people say hopeless, I don't think so, but kind of just distorted, very hellish look at times, and can feel to the film. But at the same time, you've got beautiful shots in this, especially when they get out into the countryside. They're travelling, of course, and they stop by different places. This is when the film really opens up. It's kind of an adventure film, road trip perhaps, film in the middle of the film, and then of course they do. The whole point is they're trying to reach this signal, of course, by the army at this kind of base, and basically, of course, Christopher Eccleston is the one here. Major Henry West, and he's the one giving this speech, for example, and saying there's a haven, if you just go to this certain point around Manchester, and that's of course what the characters do, as we know later on, and they do arrive. Of course, just after the hour mark is when things really change, and of course, one of the tragic deaths, in a horror film for many decades, in my opinion. That's how tragic it is. You could say maybe it's kind of unexpected, actually. This death, and maybe quite shocking, which it is, of course, in the way it occurs, the transformation there, really shocking stuff. But also, it's kind of foreshadows as well. The crow, the symbolic nature there, and just the way, this kind of the music changes slightly there as well, and the angle perhaps, but it's just a kind of a character who certainly at this point in the film, just over the halfway mark, maybe you don't expect first time round to actually die at this point, but of course the blood drops into his eye from that body there, and it's just a really shocking moment there, and of course it does change, and then of course the rest of the film is them, the remaining three in this this location with the army and the base, and of course not all is as it kind of seemed it would be, and of course the rest of the film is this kind of really intense, and disturbing, and maybe hopeless at times for the characters' situation they're put in, and basically, of course, Christopher Eccleston is the main kind of villain here, and he's the one who kind of preaches this these ideals, and of course basically we learn that this initial message is only to basically get the men to basically trap individuals here, and yes, it's very, very disturbing and very dark, and because of course it doesn't all add up. You can kind of catch on with that at first, because initially, of course, this major saying that the character, of course, one of them that's been chained up, happened 2 days ago. Now, how would that happen if the message, of course, was already being signalled, of course, the radio, that recording, and this has happened. They've taken a few days quite clearly to travel there. So initially, when you hear that, you surely think this isn't right. Of course, we do learn that things, are not all as they seem, and basically the rest of the film is then being, kind of imprisoned, and of course Jim escaping from this and then coming back, to kind of rescue Selena and Hannah, and basically, yes, this is one violent, disturbing, brutal final act, that I just, once again, of course, quite obviously we know there's that scene I won't get into, but of course involving, the eyes there, wow, that's really, really gross, must say that, and probably, the most disturbing part of the film in many regards, at a certain moment, and of course, all played, that theme, of course, being played there in a heartbeat, and that song just being used in the film in that kind of final action set piece, you could say, and then, of course, we kind of have this epilogue, maybe, and this is very, very different in the way it's shot. Now we are kind of in this this safe haven now. We're kind of after this, 28 days later again, and of course Jim waking up once again, but this time, things are a lot more hopeful, and of course, yes, these characters, it's implied anyway that they're then rescued at the end, and of course there is a sequel to this film. 28 weeks later, Danny Boyle had a slight involvement there, I think producing in some way, but other than that, it's that film I'm not a big fan of at all. It's certainly not a great film in my opinion, and I was very disappointed with that film. Of course, but that of course leads on 28 weeks later. But yes, this film, I'm just going to talk about this film, in the sense that at the end it is implied, of course, a very, very hopeful message, and yes, these characters, that them final moments, seeing the reactions, just the joy, and it's just so satisfying there, and this whole kind of harsh experience, raw, emotional journey, and then of course these characters, in the end at least, do find hope, do find kind of this way of course escaping, at least it's implied, and yes, in that sense, a truly, truly satisfying film, and of course it is a very intense film for most of the runtime, but then of course, you have this humanity throughout. You've got these maybe rests in the middle of the film in the road trip where it kind of feels a lot less intense, but then of course the final act kind of amps it up again, and of course it is very, very intense, claustrophobic again, and just really, really violent. You've got actual humans here as villains, where you didn't have at first at all. Until this, until they get to the army, this base and stuff, and this kind of manor. There was no human villains really in that sense that interacted with them. So it's kind of this film where it kind of disrupts this group, even more effectively, because it is after an hour into the film that these villains, of course, come into the film as the humans, and then of course it does make very, very genius parallels here as well. That sergeant, one of the sergeants there is kind of saying a lot of things here, and basically saying what is the difference, perhaps, with this outbreak of rage into what was actually already happening across the world, and of course it's something that you can kind of see what he's saying there, and it's something that of course it is making different connections to the actual world, and I think this is just, in the way that that's done and explored, really, really thought-provoking, very, very disturbing as well, and kind of just, this kind of perspective is very, very disturbing, I feel, and it's just, that character there was actually, a great character as well. Unfortunately, very, very quickly killed by the rest of these, villains here, and then of course Jim does escape, and then he goes back for revenge, if you will, but mainly to rescue, of course, Selena and of course Hannah. And yes, just Megan Burns playing Hannah. You've got Naomie Harris giving an absolute masterful performance in this film as Selena. Wow, what a performance! She's a great actress, of course, famously in Bond very recently, of course, the last few Bond films, and yes, of course, Cillian Murphy. He is a great actor. Been in so many films, of course, and I think in many regards this is kind of his best performance. I just think it's stunning, very physical and raw, but just and also just so the charming character here. I feel, of course, he does some really brutal things, especially that final action scene. But again, at the same time, a thoroughly human character. It's just showing how these characters react in a human way to this epidemic. It's not fake. The motivations are all clear. They're all kind of understandable in different ways. It's a non-judgmental film again. Once again from Danny Boyle. It's one that just offers these characters complex individuals. Yes, basically how they're dealing with this kind of apocalypse. And this is something that, in the way it's done, is just so relatable, and putting yourself in there in that experience. Also combine that with the camera. Choices of cameras here. This low budget feel, gritty nature, up close and personal. Visceral feeling. And this big. Kind of these action scenes and stuff. So tense. This is the thing. The way these the infected are portrayed in this. Also the fact that this, to do with the kind of low budget cameras and the frame rate actually adds even more to this kind of the infected in this film basically act. Their movements are just wow. I mean, they're so rigid in a particular way, and kind of so disturbing. And the fact with the frame rate and the kind of quality and the grain perhaps, and the overall kind of the kind of jagged feeling of course at times that the film has. It just adds to this kind of rigid, stiff movements that these infected have, and it's just even more disturbing for that kind of reason. And then of course we have this spiritual feeling, the use of music. It's not just kind of this piece, the main theme, and these big songs. It's something that also has classical music in the film, and I think the way Danny Boyle uses this is stunning. Really is wonderful. And that's the thing, this film really, as I'm saying, opens up after that first 20-25 minutes maybe, and of course it does reveal itself as actually a wonderful film, a wonderful experience, and truly warm. It's got great comedy in the film. Frank is probably my favourite character, just in terms of likability and just this warm kind of father figure to all these characters, not just his own daughter Hannah. Of course, Brendan Gleeson plays Frank. Say no more. He is one of my favourite actors actually, and I just think he always adds this warmth and this kind of just this aura he has about him, and I just think he's always kind of so likable in particular films, and I think even his minor roles perhaps always so memorable, and just playing just adding this likability and this warmth to the characters that he plays. I think he's a great actor, and the addition to him to this film it really is stand out. And of course Naomie Harris, as I've said, is just stunning. Very complex character. At first, of course, she's saying it's just survival. That's all it is. All it is, now at this point, is staying alive, basically. And of course, she does kind of change her stance on this throughout the film, maybe because of interactions with Jim and stuff, and this family, and actually realizing that the happiness and stuff through acting, in the group, actually is still possible, and it's not just being alone and getting through it. And basically this kind of clash of ideals and stances on this and different perspectives. One of the things that drives the film so wonderfully, and the performance from her is really stunning. Once again, actually her best performance in my opinion that I've seen. Just stand out. Really something else. Very powerful performance. She is just a great character. Really something else. And of course, Jim as well, just an absolutely amazing character. Hannah, not a standout, but her role in the film and her interactions with Frank, and just the way that she does survive after he dies, this tragedy, and the way that kind of she still makes it out, of course, with Selena and Jim, even after these horrible dark moments, of course, that happen later on after that as well. But this kind of this warm, satisfying feeling at the end, just very, very, kind of showing the character's determination, Hannah as well, and the way they keep going through this, and they do eventually make it out. And ironically, of course, the military, the army here, are the ones that do, of course, get overrun and are outsmarted by our main characters here. And of course, that final shot of that infected individual there is just, what a shot there, stunning, with the storm, of course. Classic kind of use of weather here. I say classic as well because although this is a very, very, of course, being digital as well and stuff, and all these things are a very, very different route to past, kind of films and the way they're made. But despite that, I think actually this final act in particular is something that it actually feels like a kind of classic mystery, kind of thriller, horror here, and I think there's something about this actually. I always catch on. It kind of feels like a classic film here actually, and the way that Eccleston is Christopher Eccleston is kind of walking through that shot there, and the way that he's they're sitting at the table and at night time, and it's kind of this twist, of course, but this feeling you get that something isn't quite right from the very beginning, and the way it unravels, and you learn the different twists and the way that the dark kind of nature that it has, I think actually is very, very classic in its feeling and its tone, and I think another thing I love about the film is that and I think just the kind of way that it's, of course, a very, very harsh film in its its different areas, but it really is a wonderful pure film as well. It's got a lot of violence, but of course this is exploring how rage is, of course, something that is a devastating thing in a society, but of course it's showing the contrast with what can be possible here, and just this the strength of a group perhaps as well, and just individuals as well, flawed human characters and their response to this big epidemic, and it really is a perfect kind of combination, personal and macro. I feel really, really something else, this film, and just in itself, it is, of course, a thrilling horror film, absolutely a scary film. It ticks all the boxes really for me for a modern horror. It really is the best, I think, of the 2000s, just in terms of pure horror, and where just I'm so impressed with this film. I think from a filmmaking standpoint, it's stunning. Of course, there is criticism of the low quality, kind of cameras, and stuff, and the shots, but and maybe the audio even. But I think actually this is quite genius in the way this is done. It's one of the only instances where this is really, really truly perfected actually in this way, and I think it just it wouldn't have been the same actually if this had been expensive cameras, equipment, and done in a different way. Danny Boyle and everyone involved are going for this vision, in this kind of way to kind of create their own unique take on this kind of genre, perhaps disaster film. Sci-fi, kind of post-apocalyptic, yes, just zombie film, although not quite a zombie film, and I think in that sense it's just so amazing, it's so unique, and just fully enjoyable in my opinion. Of course, the opening scene and the first few kind of the first 20 minutes or so is extremely on edge and quite hard to kind of handle in many regards. It's kind of something that you do feel satisfied from, at least I do. I come out after that initial just explosive tense genius world building as well, and kind of the subtle moments of just silence, isolation, and all this combined in this real just in general just wowing first act. But after that I come out satisfied, and I can kind of have these moments of rest, for example, when they hit the road, and there's well the moment when they arrive into the flat, the tower block there, Frank and Hannah, and this initial meeting, and the warmth, you know, of him offering them shelter, you know, and kind of respite from this you know, never-ending nightmare. Perhaps there's something about that as well, and just this initial kind of there's something about this in a horror film, you know, it feeds into this sort of survival element, and this feeling of you know, the calm before, you know, another storm perhaps as well. But just these characters discussing their plans and how they're kind of viewing this whole outbreak, and then of course just hitting the road together. You get a lot of character development, of course, from Frank as well, and Jim. You know, you get this early on, and it just makes for a more meaningful experience. And not kind of throwaway characters that you see in a lot of horror films. You know, especially now, of course. But yes, you know, it's something. Instead of that, these are human characters with so much to kind of relate to, I feel, and of course they have flaws. You know, they are not, you know, perfect. Of course, they are humans. They are you know, responding to this outbreak in a believable, I feel, human way, and of course in this sense as well, they are, you know, charming, funny characters as well. And the kind of the shopping scene, for example, I love that scene, one of my favourites actually, and just this joyous moment. You've got all this. It's not just a fully dark, grim experience, I feel, and of course the ending as well, and just certain moments, you know, when they're kind of journeying, of course, as well, just in general, is wonderful, and it does have some wonderful, you know, just beautiful shots in there, and just, you know, really, really wonderful, you know, cinematography, I feel, the editing as well, and the way, you know, it's really gritty, up close and personal, and just the way that kind of the close-ups are used, and you know, getting you right into this experience. The chase scenes, some of the most thrilling I've seen, that I've took part in. You know, it really does feel like you're in this film, you know, for me, and just an absolute masterpiece. And yes, just one of my favourite horrors, just, you know, simply of all time. Of course, I absolutely adore this film. I'm pretty obsessed with it, actually. You know, when a horror film, you know, when a kind of thriller, sci-fi film is this good, you know, this investing, you know, it really is a treat, in my opinion. I think, you know, this is really one of my favourite horrors, just of all time, really, as I've said. And I think, you know, I'm so invested in this film, the characters, the relationships, the romance, of course, just being such a true, honest romance between Selena and you know, Jim. And I just think the whole way the film is constructed, the opening, of course, you know, the very, very opening, and then, you know, the opening act, you know, just this masterclass in how to build this world, you know, this kind of course, empty, you know, feeling, you know, then this whole kind of the way that just adds to the intensity, and all these chase sequences, the kind of up close and personal, gritty, kinetic way in which Danny Boyle and, you know, and team have captured this, you know, all of the kind of elements are here, and kind of all the, you know, all the kind of the needs for a truly great horror film in this sense are all here. And I just think, you know, it's just among my favourites, really, you know, just in general, certainly of the century. And I think, you know, it's kind of hard sometimes to decide to get right exact, you know, how, you know, different tiers that I have, of course, and the adjustments and stuff. And I think sometimes it's best to just go on instinct. You know, do I love a film this much to give it this, instead of maybe just leaving it there? And I think I have to give this film, just my personal opinion, I have to give it a rating of 100% plus. Tier 3, and I think it just gets in there. You know, it's not real high in there, in that bracket, but, you know, I think actually, I have to be honest, you know, I know that I kind of left it, you know, kind of a few slots, it would have maybe been below, or even a slot, you know, below the kind of the current tier 3s that I have on my list. And I think I maybe regret not giving this a tier 3, because I think it does, you know, I just love this film so much. I've seen it many times, and it just kind of grows on me even more every single time. You know, the comfort feeling in this, the thrill, you know, the kind of roller coaster ride of emotions, you know, just the horror elements, I think, and this whole kind of just how fascinating this is, and kind of how it's so believable in the way of what would happen, you know, and how people would respond to this outbreak and kind of this apocalypse, you know, and it's not kind of traditional take, of course, but it has got many classic elements in the film, I feel, as well, and just the story beats in its different themes and the atmosphere at times as well. And I think there's just a purity to the emotions, to the visuals, and just to the, for example, the use of music as well, the classical music in there. It's just all creates this thrilling, absolutely quite a real disturbing experience at times, but also kind of and distorted, but also kind of hypnotic, kind of dreamy experience as well, and one that kind of it is such a spiritual experience. I feel, in the way that it's kind of, it just has these characters that I care about so much, the warmth of it, this kind of family, if you will, and of course villains as well. It's got this kind of tension, this drama, and the conflict of ideals, and I think a truly stunning horror film. And as I say, it is just in the tier threes, but nevertheless, I think accurately, the decision is to give it a tier 3. And just these these relationships, as I say, with these characters. And I think survival films usually are really kind of it's an area, it's a kind of setup where it doesn't really allow for a lot of potential for character building, world building as well, in general terms. But I think kind of putting these characters in a situation, any character really, where they're forced to interact and kind of help each other, perhaps, if you will, and kind of getting to know these characters and just learn all the backstory, and for them to form these believable relationships, and just this romance as well, which I really love in the film, and just this theme of family and this survival horror elements that are in this film, the adventure feel it has, kind of road trip as well at times, and I just think it really is a wonderful film. It may be, of course, really, really intense experience, kind of very hard going in the first act in that sense, and really constantly on edge, but it does of course kind of open up. I truly adore this film, and I think it's definitely one of my favourite horror films, just in general. It's one of them, maybe on that list of quite a small list, I would say, of masterpiece horrors, in that sense, compared to other genres, but there are a few, of course, that I think are masterpieces, but less so than most genres. But I think, and I do love the horror genre. When offered this type of film, I think this really ticks all the boxes, and it just is a treat. It really is. Very, very graphic, of course, not for everyone, of course, and very, very dark and disturbing, but it is full of heart, full of wonder, and just a spiritual experience and an emotional film, where I'm just fully invested and I care about these characters, and it's just a satisfying film, and one that just thrills me. It entertains me so much from start to finish, even the scenes where they are truly, truly disturbing, that I'm shaken. It has a hold of me. It kind of takes me on this trip, and on the other side, every time I'm more kind of impressed, and have more kind of affection, actually, for this experience. Danny Boyle is a master, in my opinion, and I think this is just, of course, Trainspotting is my favourite. That's by far, but this film could be my second favourite, actually. I'm not going to reveal exactly there, but there is another one that is very, very famous. I'm not going to say this, and 28 Days Later, you could probably guess, but yes, this film is a contender. I feel, certainly a strong contender for my favourite film from Danny Boyle that isn't Trainspotting, that has the top spot, but this is maybe my second favourite, or third favourite, of course. I'm not going to reveal, but yes, an absolute masterpiece. Just one of my favourite horrors. This is something to behold, and I think maybe just everything, all the choices, in terms of the cameras and stuff, and all this kind of the elements, and kind of the way to approach this film, I fully agree with on this occasion. And I think, actually, ironically, the film is really, really beautiful, in a lot of areas, and it's just, its soul, and the heart of the film is, is in the characters and stuff, and the way in which they treated the humanity, and the human response to this outbreak, and the way it just geniusly and really in such fascinating ways explores these sci-fi elements and this whole kind of thing on this virus, rage, of course, being the virus in this film, and it really just enthralls me, imagination, in imagination terms, and I think as a piece of cinema, it's just fully engaging for me throughout. And yes, I think it really is just among the best films of the century, whatever genre you want to talk about. I think it is an absolute masterpiece, in my opinion. And yes, I think I just have to allow it into that tier 3 mark. It makes sense. It really is. I think a special masterpiece that is a slight cut above quite a few of the masterpieces that I have on my list of favourites, and that's what defines these tiers. It's certainly the tier 3, the jump, just a little bit. I just love it a little bit more than quite a few bulk of films that are before it, and I think it does sit alongside some films, a few films at least, in the tier 3 mark. And yes, it was tricky, it always is, but yes. As always, of course, thanks for watching. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to talk about this. It's another film, these Danny Boyles I never really talk about too much with other people, actually. It seems like he's not exactly... it's just, very interesting. He's not really a director who I really discuss too much with people, simply because they don't, find it as a talking point, and it's just never really come up too much. And now watching these films again and reviewing them for YouTube, it's interesting. I think actually realising, I've not really talked about these too much, apart from with a couple of people here and there, about these films and different people's takes on these films. This is so unique, and I wonder how people respond to the visuals and stuff and the whole approach. Of course, the fast-moving zombies and all this. It's going to be great to talk about in the comments. And yes, Danny Boyle films in general would be very interesting to see how you rank his films, maybe. And yes, tell me your thoughts. Please do. And as always, thanks for watching my review.